Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show on Voice America. It's great to be back with you again for another fantastic week, another great guest in John Richards. We're going to be talking about raising resilient boys today and the challenges of being a parent. Often when we've got busy jobs, busy families, lots of things taking our attention, and then we have those young boys to look after and keep on the straight and narrow and keep supported. It's Sometimes you feel like your hands are really full. But John and I are going to talk about that today. But before we get on to this interview, I'd like to say a big thank you to Jean Early and to Wendy Keller, two wonderful people within my Elevation Collective community. They talked last week with me about 10x. It was actually a repeated interview, as it was a very popular repeated interview, as I had a week's holiday. But I think that thinking today, how can you make step changes in your thinking, which ultimately replicate into a step changes in who you're being and what you're doing. I think it's a very important thing to consider. How do I keep on moving myself forward? My name is Chris Cooper, and I develop leaders, teams, business cultures. I've hosted the Business Elevation Show on Voice America since September 2011. This is the 591st interview, but obviously one lips on now. And I also host a community of very heart-led, exceptional people across the globe who are contributing to good through their work, and we help them to amplify that good to ensure that we send a more positive narrative out into the world. Because if you focus on good and you amplify the good that you're doing, then I think that's the one way that the world can start to transform from the dark place it's in right now. So let's talk about raising resilient boys. Let's talk about raising boys. My guest today is John Richards. He's had 25 years of frontline experience in crisis management and youth homelessness. Boy, I bet he's experienced some things. He's shaped a visionary approach to leadership and personal development. He's going to talk with me. I have two teenage boys. John has a fabulous son he'll talk about shortly as well. And his journey has really not only been about crisis intervention and youth homelessness, but he's also developed a very inspirational program. He guides transformative retreats in some of the world's most untamed and inspiring landscapes. He's been to the mystic heights of Tibet. He's worked in the Sahara, to the ruggedness of South Africa and the Himalayas. And it enables him to connect with nature, help to cultivate uncertainty, and build resilient communities. He undertook a groundbreaking collaboration with Tsering Sangpo Sherpa and seven-time Everest summiteer Nima Kancha Sher-pa. John brought to life the first ever Sherpa-led leadership retreat in the awe-inspiring Everest region, and he has an acclaimed book on awareness, change, relationships, and fruitfulness, published in 2018. He's a really compassionate guy, and say today we thought, actually, why not talk about boys, talk about bringing up your sons in this very challenging world that we live in right now. So a big welcome to my guest, to John Richards.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, John. Hey, you've got a really interesting background, but tell us a little bit about how it all started. What was your childhood like, and how did it lead you to doing what you do today?
Yeah, I did have a extremely unusual background, I guess, in childhood because I didn't grow up in a conventional family unit. My parents had very strong convictions about helping people in social action. And so at a very young age, they gave up their careers and gave up their home and they moved into community. And so I have an older sister and a younger sister. And our entire childhood, from when I was born, really, up until when we moved abroad when I was about 16, we lived in community. And my parents have an extremely strong commitment to including the people around them wherever they're living and having people into their home and trying as much as they can to be fruitful in terms of supporting people. And so my mum was a TEFL teacher, teaching English as a foreign language. And one of the projects my parents ran when I was growing up was that they would invite people who maybe couldn't afford to come to the UK, couldn't afford to live, and maybe couldn't afford to have English tutoring, and they would live with us and in our little community and with some of my parents' friends. And then my mum would teach them up to, I think it was first certificate English, and then those people would go off and do different projects in different parts of the world. So me, me and my sisters, when we talk about our childhood, I always say we would come down to breakfast and peer through the door into the dining room, and there would be 6 Koreans or
Oh,
4 Ugandans or people from all over the world, and they would live with us and just join our family. My mum and dad would always treat people as if they were part of the family, and so that was a very unusual and fascinating way to grow up, because at every mealtime there were people doing development from all over the world, and I don't have any single memory at all in my childhood of just being with my mum and dad, and that was a fascinating privilege. And then at the age of 16, my family moved abroad. My mum and dad had decided to move out of the UK and to go on a sort of new adventure, and so we moved to North Portugal, and my younger sister went into Portuguese school. She's an extraordinarily brave, tough person, and at 12 she went into Portuguese school and just got on with it. And my older sister, I think she studied a bit, and I went to a school. It was actually the oldest British school in Europe, but it was a very international context. So I went into a class of something like 16 nationalities. And so from the age of 16, 17, 18, before I came back to the UK to go to university, I had this incredible multicultural experience of every day sitting with people from India and El Salvador and Russia and China and all of these different places. And we were a very tight community. So then I went to kind of uni, but that was probably my early formative experiences have just been of community and a very multinational context.
wow, what a fascinating background. And you mentioned there that you don't remember being alone with your mum and dad. Did you have one-to-one time with your mum and dad? Was there ever time for that?
Yeah, yeah. I think I mean I remember different experiences. Like my mum um, gave us this incredible inheritance. I think of all the things probably you can give your children, if you can give them this, it's of inestimable value. When we were kids, for probably 10 years or 50, or maybe more of our childhood, before bed, my mum would sit with the three of us. We would get into my mum and dad's bed, and my mum would read the classics to us. So my earliest memories before bedtime, we didn't have a TV, and my mum would sit with us and read all of these incredible books that she loved. My mum's an amazing reader. And so me and my sisters would have that experience before kind of bedtime. And it wasn't at all that I didn't have time with my parents. I just mean that when I think back to my childhood and I think what my son's childhood has been like, I just think that I had this incredibly kind of colorful experience of community. And I don't remember coming home and sitting at the dinner table and it being me and my sisters and my mum and dad. That was just never kind of the case. And just in case it's humorous, if I visit my mum and dad now, I visited them a few years ago and it was around bonfire night. And I remember turning up and my mum giving me a hug and saying, "Now, darling, we're just having a couple of people over this evening. I hope you can help and carry trays." And I think it was about 9 o'clock. I counted about 40 people who my mum and dad had invited and cooked for and done this huge fireworks display. Anyone they can find who hasn't got anywhere to go, they will invite and they will include. And my dad will go and sort of pick up a whole lot of people. My mum will cook, and then my dad will do like a fireworks display for people who wouldn't be able to have that experience. And mum and dad will have them in their homes. So it's an unusual experience. It's very challenging. Because it makes you think very deeply from childhood about yourself and your identity, and it makes you think about bigger questions. But it's a very enriching experience, and I think that I owe a huge amount to my parents in terms of what they've taught me, and they've been demonstrative in terms of the way that they have actually lived out their beliefs in a way that you would probably only see in sort of a million people in the modern world. And there are things obviously that we would disagree on. There were things about my childhood that were difficult and challenging, as is true in my son's background, and it will be true in your background. None of our backgrounds are perfect, but I have just amazing respect for my sisters and my mum and dad. And I just think so much of the things that I get to do now, no way would I have been able to do those things unless I'd had the blessing of a formative background. Every day was an intensive course in life. And and the world. And I just am so grateful for that.
Wow. Well, I think we could do the whole interview on your childhood, actually. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so
Well,
interesting. So
yeah.
where's home today, and what led you into also what led you into the world of crisis intervention and youth homelessness?
Yeah, so now I live in the south of the UK. I live right by the sea. I'm extremely attached to the sea. It's a very, very important part of who I am. And so I live within sight of the sea, right opposite the beach. And a lot of my life today, I've spent a lot of time kind of by the sea, and I do as much as I can. And I think one of the reasons for that is that when you work in crisis intervention, which is a very unusual environment where you're working all of the time in holistic communities where you're trying to protect people. Really, the name of what we do is how can we protect this person that's come from this extraordinary level of difficulty and trauma in their background. We move them into a kind of safe community, and then how can we be in some way fruitful? How can we be a blessing to them? And so I think that for me, it's really, really important that I live in sight of the sea and that I have somewhere to go to where I can spend kind of a lot of time. So I've been based in the UK for quite a while, since I moved back from Portugal and went to university, and I live in a place called Worthing, not far from Brighton. And yeah, that's kind of my main life. My son travels a lot. He's currently in Southeast Asia. He's off traveling, but normally he lives a few kind of roads away. And I have a real vibrant community of people, and I'm close enough to Gatwick that I travel fairly regularly. I think last year I did 7 or 8 international kind of trips, and so some of the year is spent away working with people in wild places, but I'm very much someone who loves my home. And if I go too far north, Chris, if I drive up to the Midlands that we both know kind of very well, I begin to get a slightly uneasy feeling. Now you're a mile away from the sea. Now you're 5 miles. Now you're 10 miles. And so yeah, that's really my life, being as close to the sea as I can.
Hmm. So doing this work around crisis intervention and youth homelessness must be very, very challenging. What have you learned from it that helps us with the understanding around how to really care for and raise young boys?
Yeah, I think I just want to start by saying these are really big questions. And I am an unusual person. My background, my daily life is unimaginably odd and weird comparative to what most people's lives would be like. When I log on in the morning or go into my services and deal with the level of risk and the issues that we're dealing with, I just recognize, having done that for a long time, it's made me an odd and a weird person. So you should weigh my perspectives and my opinions. I feel quite strongly about certain things, and you have to have strong centering to work with abuse and with violence and with trauma every day for as long as I have. But weigh everything I say, because discard anything that doesn't ring true. But the fascinating things that I've really learned is that if I can speak in parables, I try to tell stories about what I do, because when you're working with young people, you're always trying to speak in parables. You're trying to give them metaphors and things that they will remember. If you give them advice or tell them what you think, you're just contributing to the problem. You're contributing to the way that they've been treated, as if they didn't have any opinion. So we're always looking for metaphors and parables. And when I talk about crisis intervention and I talk about parenting, I tend to say these two parables. And I say that if I have to interview 50 sets of parents, and I have to find out quickly where are the families in which the young people are being abused, or where there are things that are going on that are damaging the young person, you really only need ask parents one question. You ask the parents, you say to them, what are you like as parents? And in every single case where the parent looks you straight in the eye and says, I'm a brilliant parent and I'm doing an amazing job, abuse is going on in that situation. There will be some level of the child suffering in some way. Because wherever there is parental certainty that I'm doing an amazing job, I'm a brilliant parent, it's always correlated with some level of trauma in the children. And very often people will say to me, oh, well, then what does it look like to work with someone who's a wonderful parent? I get to work with some wonderful parents who have fostered some of the young people we work with. And I think of a man I was talking to a few weeks ago who leant against the wall in my office, and he was weeping and he couldn't make eye contact. And he said to me, my wife couldn't bear to come to this meeting because she feels so ashamed about the ways that we haven't been able to help our son. And, we failed so badly. And I said, "You are what is a wonderful, wonderful parent, because the quality of your love for your children is measured in the depth of the tears that you're willing to shed for them. The
Yeah.
quality of your love for your children is measured in the depth of the tears that you're willing to shed for them." And we have a model that we use in the West that just says, everything is fine, you're perfect, you shouldn't acknowledge any difficulty. But in reality, what really we need to do as parents is that we need to accept suffering and show our children joy. We need to be willing to be in tension. And the second story I often tell when I talk about my work is that, often if you were to interview 100 parents in the West and you were to say to them, what is the most important part of being a parent, or even being in a marriage, let's say a family relationship, everyone in the West would give you the same answer. And it unfortunately would be what I would view as being the wrong answer. In every single case where you ask a Western person, you say, what's the most important part of parenting? They all say, well, that I should love my children. They talk about love. And often I think, goodness, I can't tell you how many young women I've worked with who will tell me about the horrific abuse and trauma they've suffered from the hands of someone who 5 minutes later says, oh, I do it because I love you. I think
Yeah.
of a girl who came into the office when I was young. She had the hand marks of her abusive partner around her neck. She sat with me. She was 16. She sat and wept. And she said to me, I'd never seen this before, Chris. She said, he does it to me because he loves me and I push him to it. And I was so distressed by that.
Oh,
And, often when I work in environments in the world where they would have a different worldview, this is a metaphor. But if I rounded up 100 elders, in a wild place in the world, maybe in the Himalayas or in Africa, and I said to those elders, what's the most important part of being in your marriage? What's the most important part of being a parent? Nearly all of those people would say something like, to get myself sorted out, to sort out my own heart, because everything that's within my heart as a parent, I will bring into my family. Everything that's within my soul, I will inflict on my children for good or for bad, for better or for worse. And so when you do this work year after year after year, and you work in these wild places, you become very, very curious and fascinated by how crucial and important it is for us in our relationships to be humble and uncertain and curious, and to take on tension and difficulty in our relationship with our children, to be willing to cry with them, to be willing to express anger and difficulty and let them express, but not just to think that we're doing a wonderful job and that we are amazing in terms of what we're doing. Because in every case that we think that we're right, in every case we inflict our certainty on our children, we damage and we hurt them, and we close down the opportunity for intimacy and vulnerability and for them to grow. And never was there a time in human history where we more needed parents in the light of modern social media to be able to live in the tension with their children of these things and these issues.
wow. It's yeah, powerful thinking, and it's interesting. I think about bringing my kids, and I realized, well, the thing I've realized is that it's a lot of it is an inside job. It's you have to keep working on yourself,
Yeah.
because as soon as you listen to them and you keep expressing judgment, it might be you that needs to change. My eldest son, he shared with me one weekend I came back, and he'd set up a website over the weekend, and he'd made about £1,300 selling something online. And he said, I wanted to test that it worked before I showed it to your dad. And
Huh.
I didn't want you to talk me out of it.
Huh.
And I thought, actually, I'm pleased that he did, because I might have talked him out of it. I might have allowed my judgment to stop him from experiencing that.
Yeah.
Every every moment with them, there seems to be an opportunity to learn about yourself first.
Yeah, it really is. And it's so fascinating, that when you work with young people, they what they want more than anything else is that they want to know that their parents like them, and they want to know that they're liked by their parents. And it's very, very rare that when you say to a person who has been brought up in the UK, you say, do your parents really, really like you? It's very rare you get a quick answer. The person will think very deeply about that question. And often when I'm working with parents, I will say, however much you use this word love, and you say, oh, I love you, and I love you. we can use that to cover a lot of dark things. We can use it often as an excuse. We can use it when we're busy, when we don't care a lot. Oh, well, I love my child, or I'll buy my child a nice present. But a wonderful thing to try to do is to regularly tell your child from when they can talk. If you can start these conversations. I started with my son when he could talk, and his mum was the same, to tell your child how much you like them and to tell your child all the things that you like about them. And this is a way to really build something very deep. It's very rare to meet a person, particularly Chris, of our generation, who I work with lots of CEOs and I work a lot on parenting. Normally, the thing, as you know, that's driven the person to put in the work that makes them successful is the trauma of their childhood. It's extraordinarily rare you meet a highly successful person that doesn't have deep trauma, because it's the trauma that drives the success, as we've talked about in the past. But it's so interesting that when you work with adults, I can't think of a person that I've worked with who's a very successful person who I've said, do your parents really like you? Did you feel that you were really liked? Often they'll weep, these people who are on TV or successful or have worked all over the world, and they'll say, my parents told me that they loved me, but I know that they didn't really like me. I know that I wasn't really liked. And these things are complex for us to think about, but they're powerful and they're important. It's easy for us to inflict our views and our certainties onto our children, and then just as an afterthought to say, oh, well, but I love them. It's incredibly difficult to be the type of parent who you overhear your child. And I would love one day this to happen with my son. I dream of it. His mum's an incredible mother, and this is something that we would both hope for, I'm sure, in the future. To hear your child say to their girlfriend or their tutor or their friend, yeah, my mum and dad, they really like me. They really like me as a person.
It's really interesting because a kind of quite, I guess, quite a common thing people say to their kids is, I might not always like you, but I'll always love you.
Interesting. Yeah, really interesting. All of these things are semantics. And as I said earlier, I try to speak in metaphors and parables to try in some way to help myself and certainly my son. All the things that I'm saying to you, every single word, I've talked for hours and hours and hours to my son about from when he was very, very little. I started asking my son his advice when he was a very, very little boy. And I asked him what he thought about things from when he was very little. And his mum used to he has an incredible mother. And when his mum and I split when he was little, we said every time we talked, we said, regardless of our problems and our faults and what we've got wrong, we must not visit our angst and our separation on our son. And we talked for hour after hour after hour. How can we protect our boy from the break in our kind of relationship? And one of the ways we did that, his mum's a shepherd and she works outdoors, and she made the decision very wisely, to take my son sort of out of school. But as my son grew up, his mum took him out such a lot into nature and surrounded him from lots of kind of nature. So when lots of other kids were in school, my son had this amazing mum who took him into the fields and taught him to deliver lambs and, work with all of these different animals from when he was little. And I would just obviously take him into the sea. If my son couldn't paddleboard pretty early on, then I would have found that difficult. And I think that one of the great gifts we can give our children is to transfer our love and our joy in nature to our children. Because as I was saying to a CEO this morning who was talking to me about their finances, in countries where people get out a lot in nature, they don't need to pay. In the UK, if it's a bleak time of year, you need money to do something that's joyful. But, with nature, if you possibly can, show your children that joy and the best things in their life, the best things in their routine should not be something that costs. If you need to spend money to be happy, you're extraordinarily poor. And we have this incredible wealth of nature around us where we live. And I know, Chris, you live in a beautiful place. And in indigenous communities, the most important thing the young children would be taught is, look, you belong to the mountain that's up there. You belong to the forest. You belong to the animals, and you belong to that nature that's around you. None of it belongs to you. None of it belongs to you. You belong to it. And so my son was so blessed that his mum had this incredible connection. She still does. She has an amazing business and community. And I've tried to take my son into some beautiful places. But how can we give to our children? We can only give to them that which we've integrated and are living out ourselves. our children will only learn that's which we have integrated and are living out. One of the things we can live out is to be parented by the nature around us, for us to be a child of the sea, for us to be a child of running or of the downs, for us to be a child of wildness. Nothing is greater to be able to give to our children, and it will be a lifetime of joy for them if we can integrate them into that knowledge and that reality.
And I mean, that's really is fascinating. You know, it's got me thinking. I've got lots of questions. Only 3 minutes till commercial break that I can ask you in this world of this digital world where it feels like, you know, a mobile phone is attached to pretty much all of us. Um, you know, if it's not if we're not holding it, it's by our bed. And with children, you know, they very easily get sucked into that world. And you know, whereas I love nature and see that, I sometimes find it hard to get my kids to come out into nature with me because I'd rather be, you
Yeah,
know, talking with their communities online, etc. So I'm intrigued at how you know, how we do bring that nature back to them, so they see that as being more important than the digital world. So
absolutely.
we've
Yeah.
actually got a minute now, so we'll continue with that after the break, I think, because I think it,
Yeah, there's some really interesting things that I've been thinking about that maybe will I hope in some way kind of be of interest. So yeah, should we come back to that after
after the
after
break.
the after the break?
Yeah, so we're back with you all in just a couple of minutes. Do join us. I think this is a fascinating interview. John, with his very unusual kind of background. He explained they're being brought up in a community with lots of people and the opportunity to travel, and then he's gone into, you know, this world of crisis intervention, youth homelessness, but combines it with adventures abroad. You know, I think it's brought some real fascinating depth that we all need to listen to and reflect upon. Lots of wisdom in here. So we're back with you again in just a couple of minutes with John Richards. Hi, this is Chris Cooper. I'm with John Richards, and what a thought-provoking conversation. What wisdom and insight have you picked up? Would be very interesting to hear from the conversation with John. John, at the end of the last session, I started to talk a little bit about, the online challenge. And, what do you have to say about social media and parenting? Because it is a big dilemma for us all.
Yeah, I just want to say again, as I said at the beginning, my life and my views are very unusual. I live a very unusual life. So just weigh what I say and discard what doesn't ring true. Um, but when you work with children who have been traumatized and been abused, you see a very interesting principle. If a child comes from a background where Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they've been starved and beaten and abused, and that's been their whole childhood, over time, you can help the young person to understand that what happened to them was wrong. If they've had a consistent experience of abuse and bad things happening, the way a human psyche will work is that you can help that person to understand that being raped and being traumatized and hurt when I was a child, that was terribly wrong. But many, many of the young people we work with, the most traumatized young people, this is what will have happened to them. This. On Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, they will have been abused terribly. And then on Thursday, for no reason at all, they will have been taken to McDonald's or they will have been given a gift. And the thing that is most traumatic to the human psyche is the unpredictability and the uncertainty
Yeah.
of that push-pull of trauma and then reward. And the way that the algorithm of social media is set up is in exactly that way. Your children will be fed 3 or 4 things that they agree with and that are what we would say is just pleasure giving, pleasure seeking. If you're into politics, this will happen. You'll get 4 or 5 posts that are exactly what you would agree with. And then the algorithm is very clever. It knows how to break you. It knows how to entice you. It knows how to get you into its thrall. It will drop something that will make you very angry. And you'll be in this place emotionally. I've had 5 things about what I agree with and believe in. And then this thing in my feed has made me extraordinarily angry. And the way that people are hurt and damaged and addicted is through that process. If people just have things all of the time that they agree with, they normally over time will sort of think, that's kind of a bit much. And if they have things they disagree with, but the algorithm is very, very clever. It will give you 80% of things you agree with, and then it will inflict this thing on you that will addict you of something that will make you kind of cross. So what children are dealing with from a very young age, as we kind of know, children have been through 2 huge traumas in the last 20, 25 years. This is the wonderful, wonderful work of Jonathan Haidt. If you want to read the best quality work about your child's mental health and technology, get into John Haidt's work. His work is so, so wonderful. And, John Haidt says that we thought for years and years and years that tech was the biggest thing causing damage in our children, until we realized with this kind of thunderous revelation that tech was the second biggest thing destroying our children's psychology and leading to these huge rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. And the number one thing that we've taken away from children in these last probably 20 years is that we removed unsupervised play from children. And in the West, you will not find a parent if you say, how often does your child have experience of unsupervised play? You just won't find it. But Chris, when you and I grew up, I would come home and my mum would, say hello. Maybe she'd give me a sandwich or a cup of tea. And then my mum would fully expect me to go. And I would be off and I would be out and I would be playing hour after hour after hour. And I'd know our tea was at 5:30 and I would come back. But you see, what we have learned about children's mental health is that children learn resilience to depression and anxiety. They learn communication. They learn integration with nature. They learn interaction with their peers entirely and solely through unsupervised play. And we've taken that away from children. There's lots of reasons why we've done that, and we don't have time to go into them. But, we've removed unsupervised play. And so we have this generation of young people whose parent is the algorithm. They've been parented by the algorithm. Their phone is their older sibling. And I can't tell you how common it is, Chris, for me to be in a meeting with a young person where they're telling me about these terrible things that have happened to them, but they will all of the time be holding their phone as if it were a religious icon, as if it was the hand of their loving parent. They don't have a loving parent. They hold the hand of their phone. Their phone is their comfort. The phone is the drug that always gives to them. And that doesn't mean that technology is always a bad thing, but it's not as good a thing as a wonderful, vibrant community of someone human. Lots of the young people I work with, for example, their entire sexual education has been through tech from when they were very young age. We have a situation, for example, Chris, at the moment with young men. I often talk to young men, and a boy, by the time he's about 12, through the algorithm, through his device, will have seen more sexuality and more nudity than all of his male ancestors, leading right back 13.8 billion years, however long it is. We'll have a boy who's 12 and he's seen more nudity at 12 years old than all of his male ancestors. And all that we often say when we sit around and think of these things is that, Chris, we don't know what that means for our young boys. We don't know what it means. What does it mean for them? We don't know. And so we're moving into times psychologically with young people's mental health, where we are on the verge of a generation coming into adulthood and parenthood that has had to deal with exposure to things that would be unimaginable. The only context that might compare is when in the early part of the last century, we sent very young people onto the front line of warfare, and we saw the impact that that had on them being exposed at a very young age. The internet is doing many, many worse things than happened to young men in the First World War. Tragic and appalling though that was, I honestly believe that we have this tide of exposure and damage and trauma that we don't really fully as adults understand. And there's only one response to that we can make as elders, is that we have to think about how as elders we build contexts and communities of us who are older to try to protect those young people and to build context for them where they can work through some of the things that they're experiencing and being exposed to. And I'm sad to say that in the West, we have so many adults who are becoming addicted that at the moment we really don't have those communities. We have many people who are aware of and awake to this difficulty and want to do things about it. And that's wonderful, but we don't quite yet have the knitting together of communities yet. But it will be possible, and like you are doing so much wonderful work with community.
Thank you. You just, I mean, the challenge, as you say there, is that with the mobile phone almost becoming the parent, then as a parent who does care and does want to spend time with their kids, the mobile phone is more interesting than spending time with you, because as you say, there are algorithms, there are millions of people behind a mobile phone trying to make it as addictive as possible. That's not necessarily their all of their intention, but it does do that. How do you get the attention of your kids when their attention is being dragged elsewhere?
I think that is the question of our time for parents. I think that that's a huge, huge question. And I wouldn't profess to know the answer myself. When I'm asked questions like that, I would always ask my partner. I talk a lot to my son about these issues. My son has set up a podcast in a community to try to address and think about those issues, Chris. And I think that it's very, very, very difficult. Because you've asked, some of the things that occur to me are that I've noticed, with my boy, that the most valuable things that we can give to our children are things that are bigger than ourselves. The poorest thing you can give to your child is yourself and your opinion. That's the weakest you can make your child, making yourself the center of their world, making yourself
Yeah.
and your views their God and their idol. There's almost no worse damage you can do to your child. And the most wonderful thing you can do with your child is that you can tell your child that you don't know, and that you don't have all of the answers, and that you depend on your community, and you depend on nature, and you depend on other people. And when my son was very, very little, I started from when he was about, I'll have to ask Keith, but I think from when he was about 3 or 4, I started to get my son to spend time with the people in my community, the elders in our community. For example, Chris, if my boy was little now, I'd be saying to you, look, when are you taking the boys out, can you take Harry? You know, he'll keep up, little lad. He'll run along with you. But I would really want Harry to spend time, Chris, with you, because as parents, we're limited. I'm an odd and unusual person. There's things I've been able to give to my son, but there are so many things in my community and in the wider world from people like you, Chris, and maybe from your boys that my son needs to learn from. And the reason why we have the cliche of the saying it takes a village to build up a child is because the only way it is possible to compete with the online algorithm is to give your child from when they are born a community of people. And one of the reasons that's so difficult in the West is that so few people have very vibrant, intimate, vulnerable communities. You've built these extraordinary communities, Chris, that I've been lucky to be a part of. But the only way to compete, you know, for my boy, the only thing that would ever make him put his phone down is when I had my boys round or his mum was taking him out, you know, into kind of the wild. And then he wouldn't be interested at all in technology. Even now, my boy, he's 20, 21, but if there's a time he can be with me and, you know, out on the sea, there's 5 or 6 of us, or we're playing football or we're doing music, we do a lot of creative stuff, he'll put his phone away. But often we sort of think, oh, well, we've got to compete on our own with the algorithm. You know, we've got to take them to McDonald's or whatever else. And I think that one-to-one time is important. It's crucial with our children. But I think that we need to build communities that they see us being vibrant and joyful in, and they learn from what they see. And, you know, if you were in the Himalayas or you were in Africa, from a very, very young age, the children are parented by 6 or 7 dads and 15 or 16 mums. And the women recognize that I'm not the only person that can give to my child. They need other people. They need other people around them. And I think that the way that we've aggregated and fragmented our families into these very, very self-reliant and sadly kind of inward looking, very intense, very self-aware little units in the world has been catastrophic for our children. It's terrible what it's done to young people. And it's interesting when you work in abuse that when people begin to get healed and you see people really getting better, one of the signs of them really getting better is that they learn to trust and communicate with people other than just their individual worker or other than just me. You know, we want to prepare our children for so many of the wonderful things that are out there in the world and in all of our communities. You know, I live in a building, an old hotel by the sea. I have people in this building who are wonderful people and who I've introduced my boy to, and they've taken him paddleboarding and taught him. But we have to be outward looking. We have to be willing to make those intimate relationships in the world ourselves. It is not enough just to confine our children to our little clique, our certainty, you know, the religious view that we have or the business view that we have, because the more we confine our children in the modern world, the more we leave them completely unprotected and unable to integrate into what they're going to face in the wider world. So we have to, from when they can talk, build them into intimate, vulnerable, vibrant communities of people that we love. And, you know, my little boy, when he was little, he would watch very, very carefully when we greeted someone. I'm a big hugger because I grew up abroad. So, you know, I moved abroad when I was 16. In Portugal, you embrace and kiss the postman. So, you know, I'm a big hugger. And I noticed with my boy, Chris, you know, he would watch me very, very carefully. And when he saw me greet someone, you know, if my boy was little and he saw me greet you and have a hug, and he saw the way we looked at one another and our joy and our comfortableness, immediately, my son, I could leave him with you.
Yeah.
Immediately, he would trust you. You know, that's what would happen in a wild place, in a tribe, that you would see your dad, you'd see your mum, you'd see their intimacy with people in the community. And as a child, children are extraordinarily intuitive to that. And it's so, so rare that lots of our young children are seeing that in the West. The more that we are fragmenting in our communities, so few children are seeing their parents live out these really intimate, loving, vulnerable relationships in communities. And no wonder when they reach teenagerhood and young adulthood, they have these catastrophic problems of social anxiety and depression and fear. I don't mean in any way to be judgmental. I'm very, very limited as a dad, and there's lots of things I've got wrong. But I just say these things because I think they're important for us to think about, because we have something very big in terms of a battle as a community in terms of mental health with our teenagers coming.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sitting here feeling encouraged in the way my eldest son and his friends all hug. Uh,
Hmm.
they, they do that. But I was brought up where with a family that didn't, and
Hmm.
I remember going on I was age 28. I went on a self-development program. It was very life-changing for me. And what I did after that is I always hugged my father, and I could see for a start, it was very uncomfortable for him that I was
Yeah.
doing it, but I kept on doing it and doing it, and eventually he opened up, and he always was pleased to get a hug from me. But when he was dying, he said to me, he said, one of my biggest regrets in my life is that I always used to hug you, but I never hugged your brother.
Wow.
Never used to, because my brother again was also resistant. So I had to teach my brother to hug me as well.
Goodness,
Since
Chris.
you know,
Goodness. Bless you. Well, what a wonderful thing, Chris. What an amazing thing you've done. There's a wonderful quote that says, pain is passed down in families until someone's ready to feel it. Pain's passed down in families until someone's ready to feel it. And all of us, regardless of what's happened in our own parenting or our grandparents, we, Chris, we have to be the ones who are willing to feel it. And people don't want to do that. We don't. We want to outsource blame. We want to say, oh, well, my problems are because of that person, that parent, or those different things that happened to me. And so often, the thing that I see softening a hard and bitter person's heart is when they weep and I hold their hand and I say to them, look, my dear friend, you've got to do this work on your bitterness, because everything that you hold in your heart against your background or the people you're angry with, or your siblings, you will pass on to your own child, whether you know it or not. If ever there was a reason for us to look at our own hearts and pursue the work of forgiveness and do difficult work, it should be looking into the faces of our children. If our children don't inspire us to grow and to do deep work and to forgive, we will never be inspired to grow and to forgive. And so the fact that you've done this difficult work with your dad is because you love your boys. You're a wonderful husband and a father. That's what all of us need. We need to look into the faces of our children, and we need to see that unless we protect them, unless we are the one who feels the pain of anything that's come down in our generation through our family, that we will, sure as anything, will pass it on to them, whether we know it or not.
and how as a parent do you manage? So you were very kind in what you said in terms of being a wonderful husband and parent to my children, but I don't always feel that. Uh, you know, um,
And that's what makes you a good parent.
and
That's what makes you a good parent. If I say to someone, what are you like as a parent? The only times, as staff in crisis intervention, the only times you get a chill, and this happens a lot, is when the parent looks you full in the eye and says, I'm a wonderful parent. And Chris, your doubts are what mean that your children are loved. You love your children so that you examine your behavior and you recognize your imperfections. It's fascinating, that children will forgive everything, everything other than a parent's pride. They will forgive everything, but they won't forgive pride. And many hundreds of people I've spoken to, the thing that has been most damaging for them in their entire life is not that they were beaten, or not that their dad didn't love them, or that their mum wasn't around, not that their parents worked 80 hours a week. None of those things will damage a child long term if they have a humble parent who's willing to acknowledge their own sins and their own weaknesses. The thing that will destroy a child is where they're brought up by a parent who is certain and proud, and there is very little redemption, I'm sad to say, for that trait.
Mm. You wrote a book, Awareness, Change, Relationships, and Fruitfulness. Is there anything within those pillars that apply to raising resilient boys?
Yeah, I think it's really important to say that the only reason I wrote that book, sometimes I get introduced as an author, and I'm always slightly kind of embarrassed, because the only reason why I wrote that book is because I got really poorly. I'd done crisis intervention for many years, and then me and Harry's mum, our relationship broke down, and people often get poorly when things go wrong in their business and things go wrong at home. Often people can sustain one of those two things being catastrophic and they'll hide in the other. But for me, both those things went wrong. And I remember I had a psychological breakdown when our family sort of finally broke down. And then I had a physical breakdown, and I had this terrible physical breakdown. I remember being in intensive care as a, what was I, as 36-year-old, and the consultant was holding and stroking my hand and saying, you know, sir, we're pretty sure you have a double pulmonary embolism and we hope that you'll survive the night. And they put me on the acute ward, and there were all these people around me, really right on the door of death. I was 36. And I remember thinking, you know, if I recover, I remember I, you know, prayed through that night. And I remember thinking, if I recover, what would I like to do? And for about 9 or 10 weeks, I couldn't walk well. I had a very severe form of pleurisy that can be linked to stress. And in the time where I was recovering, I just thought I would write down some of the things I've learned and thought about in these conversations, in this travel, in these times with my beautiful boy. My boy's been such a wonderful father to me. And so I would sit every night and prop myself up. I couldn't breathe very well. I'd have this rasping breath. And I just wrote my book through those nights as a 36-year-old. And then I never intended it to be published. I never expected it to be published, but I sent it to my lovely brother-in-law, my wonderful, wonderful brother-in-law, John Desabi Richards. And he read it through and he said, you've got to get this published. And then my business partner invited me to an event. And there was a publisher at the event. And genuinely, the publisher came up to me, didn't know anything about me, and said, have you ever written anything? And I told him about my ludicrous manuscript that wasn't particularly well written, but he very lovingly over the next few weeks read kind of what I'd written and very kindly published my book. And I think that the only reason I tell that story is because so often, Chris, the best things that can happen to us in life and the best things we can teach and show our children are things that we haven't intended and earned. They're things that happen through the grace of life. They're things that happen to us. And we look, you know, I look at the relationship that I'm in. I look at the people like yourself and Neil and other people I get to work with. I look at the wonderful people in different parts of the world I get to work with. And none of those things have happened because of merit. I didn't have some clever plan. I didn't build those things carefully. I just oriented myself daily in a particular kind of way and in a particular shape. And then so often life is gracious to us. I'm sure you have that experience a lot when you look at your amazing community and your beautiful boys. And it's interesting that so often we say to the universe, give me a happy life and I'll be grateful. But, you know, if we're grateful, every day we live in this sense of just gratefulness and wonder. We find extraordinary joy. And I think that in my life with you know, the ludicrous fact that I did an English degree and couldn't really cope and didn't read any of the text, the fact that I can be announced as someone who's actually written my own kind of book. You know, life has been, honestly, Chris, so gracious to me, so kind of good to me. And I often will say to kind of my boy, there's so much goodness, there's so much grace in life, and it won't necessarily be what you've earned. Lots of your hard efforts and the things you think you can manipulate in the world will not make you whole and well. But what will make you whole and well is building deep, intimate relationships with people through vulnerability and going out into the world and learning from your community and from your children and learning to live a fruitful life. I always say to my CEOs, for goodness sake, don't settle for success. What could be a more diminished life than believing that success was what life was about? Allow your life to be fruitful, make your life fruitful. And in some small way, you and I are trying to do that. In some small way, we're trying to do that.
We are. We're gonna have to leave it there now, John, because we come to
Thank
the
you, Chris. Lovely to talk to you.
end of the interview. But you know, I picked up some great information in there, and gratefulness is absolutely important, and building deep, intimate relationships, community.
You're a brilliant dad, Chris. Every time I hear you talk about your boys, I know how loved they are. You're a brilliant dad, and I learn so much from people like you. You're such a busy person. You have so much going on, but you talk about your boys with such deep love, and your boys are very, very lucky to have you. So bless you.
Thank you, thank you. I'm not sure they would always say that, but that's life, isn't it? We'll look back and maybe look back one day and realize that we were pretty good and we did our best. So thank you so much, John. It's been an incredible conversation and interview. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure people listening here will have too. And if you've got any questions, comments, do send them to me at chris@chriscooper.co.uk. John, is there anywhere people can go to find out more about your work? Do you have a web link?
Yeah, so our entire community, our global community, everything is based out of sufferingandjoy.com. So that's all lowercase,
Sure.
sufferingandjoy.com. And on the listen page there and the read page, there's lots of resources. And so, yeah, by all means, come and get in contact, travel with us. We'd love to have you.
Thank you, John. On next week's show, Zoe Holland, MBE, we're going to talk about heart-led leadership. Zoe, amazing person. She is the group chief commercial officer of an organization called Fletcher's Group, which is about 1,100 people, a legal firm. But Zoe says there's no room for ego. She wants to also, she's committed to using law for good. But we're going to talk about some of the amazing things they do at Fletcher's, but also some of the wisdom and experience that she's had, not only in organizations, but with women's groups. She coaches neurodiversity uh, people. She created an amazing charitable venture with Hearts, and you're going to find out about that next week. So do join us next week. We're going to talk about heart-led leadership with Zoe Holland. Wish you all a tremendous week. Take care. Think about your families and your kids, and how you are as a parent. We learn a lot, but also it's a challenging journey. It's a journey of vulnerability, and we look for the